Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Alban. I am your sensei, this guy here. I'm agreed I'm here to tell you a story. I don't believe a word I say. Um, this is just for entertainment's sake. Nothing is real. Remember that. Nothing is real. The only thing that's real is love, right? So, I want to thank the few people who sent me something on my PayPal. It's still working. And it just got me through the skin of my skin. Just got me $6 to have this breakfast. To come and speak to you. I keep telling you that I live like a millionaire on $400 a month. What is inflation? It's because it's tied to the price of oil, and oil is around here it's like $6 a gallon, which gets me about a gallon gets me maybe 8 miles, 8 to 20 miles. I don't know what I'm going up and down hills. So I have to drive round trip 40 miles to make a say hi to guys. So, but a few of you sent me a few dollars, and that's really big. And you can do that. PayPal, right? The dude awake 42 at Gmail, right? And I've been writing these novels. I have one called Death. That's the first one. And our hero is Death. And it sets out the parameter of the series, because I have 5 novels in the series. So Death, Ear Hair, and that's where we go into depth into a number of families that create the legacy, right? And so the next is Bad Girl, really bad girl. Hot Pants. And that is the story of these characters who are, how to describe them? Somewhere between a cockroach and now I don't want to exist the reptile family, because some of my friends are reptiles. I had a girlfriend who was a exotic dancer, and she had snakes, and the snakes were part of her show, and so she had, her apartment was like the Caribbean in the wintertime, and so she had this white python that was really very cute, and when it liked you, it turned pink, right? So this python, would, snakes are kind of phallic, and why do you think the devil is a snake? It's phallic sex. So she'd be on stage, and her white python, known as Pinky, would wrap all around her and open up certain orifices and investigate. So, Pinky and his brothers and sisters, because she had a lot of snakes, and being her man, I had to be liked by the snakes, because in her house she had these big kind of fish tanks without lids that had like nice little world in there for the snakes, but they could crawl out and go all over the place, because she lived in the Lower East Side, and there were lots of mice and rats and cockroaches, and these guys would eat them up. So, whereas once in a while the housing authority would come in with guys, and you know, it was unbelievable. These guys would be in spacesuits, and they would fog the whole building out. It wouldn't even get to people out. So the kids would be in there. I mean, put these things in the front door, fans at the top of the building, and just suck this death out and come in. Boom, 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 on the doors, and just spray down the, get the people out. And so she had a pit bull that loved the snakes, right? Would, you know, loved the snakes more than the pit bull loved us. And the pit bull liked us. Pit bull liked me. I knew how to, I'm a dog boy. So the pit bull was there to protect the snakes and the exotic dancer. So she had really, one of the reasons she grabbed hold of me is that I was Mr. Fix-It. So I basically taped off everything so nothing could get in, and put a, yes, please. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So how's your summer going?
Huh?
How is your summer going?
Going good so far.
Have you done anything fun? You going down the beach?
Going to the beach in September.
That's,
So
well, that's probably a good time when less
Yeah.
people will be there.
that's the plan. So
And it'll still be warm.
yeah, we're going to Florida, so it'll be warm in Florida.
Oh, wow.
So-
Yeah. What part?
Don't know yet. We're debating. My husband and I are debating on
I would
which part.
say stick. There's two ways, there are two thought
Mhm.
structures, right? Well, really fun. You can either stay up north, Jacksonville and Disney World, but that's where all the tourists are, and right?
Yeah.
You go below, Jensen Beach, right?
Yeah, I've heard of
Which
that.
is on the East Coast. And if you were to go to Jensen Beach on the East Coast, just take 95, I think it's exit 40 something. It's just before Palm Beach and West Palm
Mhm.
Beach and Fort Lauderdale and Miami. So it's in essence
Yeah.
middle to southern Florida, right? Well, that whole side isn't really developed. I mean, it really isn't.
We're looking for a place not really crowded, so
And it's Jensen Beach,
I'll have
right?
to look that
At
up.
Jensen Beach, and they have. It was kind of popular in the 50s and 60s, and in the 30s, it was where because before Hollywood in the 20s,
Mhm.
they made movies in New York,
Oh, really?
and so all of the movie stars and theater people went to Florida, and Jensen Beach was where all they went,
I didn't know that.
and they had little compounds along the beach. And then after those guys, people bought it and kept the compounds and either had a restaurant or a little motel. So there are a lot of these still around, little motels that people run, not some corporation.
Yeah. I'll have to look that up. I didn't know that.
Jensen Beach.
Jensen
and
Beach.
everything along Jensen Beach down to West Palm Beach. That is really from Port St. Lucie to West Palm Beach is the only part of the East Coast that you, the citizen,
Mhm.
can go on the beach. The rest of they filled in everything that was the federal beach, and now that's like the strip mall, and all the rest of it is gated communities.
See, I didn't know that.
So you can't
Wow.
even. So you go below West Palm Beach, it's all rich people.
Yeah, all communities.
Right. So that little chunk of about 60 miles from Port St. Lucie to West Palm Beach is rich. No one goes there, but it's really beautiful, big, beautiful,
Yeah.
long beaches with the real ocean, big waves.
Jensen Beach.
The other side, the east and west coast,
Mhm.
is on the Gulf of Mexico. So they have really big beaches. They have no waves.
See, I like the waves.
So go to the east coast. That's the
Yeah.
Atlantic Ocean.
I gotta look that up. Jensen Beach. I'll have to look that up.
Jensen Beach.
Yeah.
From Port St. Lucie to West Palm Beach. Bring up the map and look at the whole thing.
I'll have to look that up. I didn't know that. Thank you. I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Right. So I was a party boy in Florida, so you want to know what it is, I got it. So I got something to play for you while I finish up my brunch here. Now this is very good. This is channel Chemical farming, the loss of human health, Dr. Zach Bush. In the show, not what the show's called. Anyway, here it is.
Thousands of years, the real control of populations has been around their food. And we find ourselves in that same, if not amped up version now that we have 7 billion souls on the planet. That becomes very, very big business when you start to be able to control food. And we see that the ultimate political control is around the food chain and whether it delivers health or not. I've basically found myself in a massively reductionist state of my understanding of the world around us, when I had really spent 20 years of my life studying medicine, which was the opposite, where every year and minute you study in that environment, they try to convince you it's more and more complicated, that there's 1,000 different diseases, that there's 10,000 different drugs to treat those diseases. But in reality, what started to deconstruct that world was the realization that the cancer I was studying under the microscope when I was devising chemotherapy happened to be really the exact same process as an ulcer in the ankle of a diabetic patient. Again, sound totally disparate, but in the end, totally reductionist viewpoint is it's only one thing, which is chronic inflammation. Inflammation is actually a normal biologic response to an injury. If we have a chronic inflammatory epidemic in the world, which is a better definition than lots of diseases, then we must be overwhelming the immune system of all of the public for some reason at the same time. Sometime between 1982 and 2000, we did something to the environment to totally decimate the protection system of our immune systems. And the big tip-off to me in this process, here I am in the labs developing chemotherapy and is so buried down the rabbit hole of the pharmaceutical model. But there was a big tip-off starting to happen in the late 1990s and early 2000s that we were seeing diseases in what seemed like completely different organ systems in the population go epidemic simultaneously. Examples of this was certainly autism that you mentioned earlier. We had 1 in 5,000 children with autism in 1975. Today we have, just 3 weeks ago, released the most recent data, 1 in 36 children with an autism spectrum disorder. And the big argument for a long time was, well, maybe we're just diagnosing and recognizing autism better, which is kind of laughable if you've ever sat with an autistic child. Here's a 5-year-old who can't speak, can't make eye contact, hits his head on the wall for a few hours a day to try to console his terror. We didn't miss that in 1975. This is not a diagnostic dilemma. But then to further emphasize that, the fastest acceleration in that growth pattern of this epidemic has happened between 2012 and today, where we're seeing a doubling time every 2 to 3 years in that autism rate. At the current rate, we'll see 1 in 3 children with autism in 2035. And then in 1996, we saw this sudden rise in the Alzheimer's dementia in women. Interestingly, the Alzheimer's rates has not changed in males since that time. But at the same time, 1996, we see this uptick and consistent linear growth parallel to that Alzheimer's track in women with Parkinson's in males. And so we have, species-specific, gender-specific, organ-specific diseases in the brain and peripheral cancers, all of which took off at the same time in the mid-1990s. Autoimmune disease. Unbelievable epidemic starting in the late 1990s. And so this was like the cracks that were starting to form in my worldview, that maybe there weren't 1,000 different diseases because they all started going epidemic at once, which really begged the question, is there a root cause of the root cause of the root cause of all disease? In the same way that we've misunderstood the gut and what gut health means, we misunderstood soil for the longest time. And in the early 1900s, really the late 1880s, we started to change the way we farmed. Simple things happened, like we went to steel grinding for wheat instead of stone grinding, which meant we could get more of the fiber out of which we created a higher gluten and a higher refined carbohydrate load in our flours and in our wheat system and everything else. So that's one example of a shift. But the main thing that happened is we started to disrespect the importance of crop rotation and soil rest, cover cropping, etc. This led to a massive death of the topsoil, which led to the Dust Bowl that ran through the 1920s and 30s. And it's fascinating that here we are only 80 years out from this event where our ancestors, 2 generations, 3 generations, were literally starving to death. We had soup lines that went for days, across the entire Midwest, and houses were literally being buried in dust of dead soil that had died. During the Dust Bowl, we actually, for the first time, started to outsource our food production because these people lost their local gardens and farms. So we started to rely on importing food for the first time, and we started to outsource that concept. Then World War II hit, and we did something interesting, which is we had this huge petroleum industry that was revved up bigger than it had ever been in the history, because we had all tanks, jeeps, mechanized warfare for the first time in human history on this scale. We had planes for the first time. I mean, this was like full out, totally different thing that had ever happened in history, and it was a world war, much different than World War I in its scope. And so we see this huge petroleum industry that suddenly grinds to a halt because the war is over. So we have this glut of petroleum, and we suddenly realized we can extract nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium out of that oil, and we started making chemical-based fertilizers for the first time. So they found a new marketplace for this oil, and it was a great message to the farmers who were still suffering with bad dirt in the Midwest. Is like, you don't need to do crop rotation, you don't need to compost, you don't need to go back to thousands of years of farming tradition. Just spray this chemical on there.
Yeah, forget about whatever you might have learned during the Dust Bowl.
Yeah. That was 40 years ago. That's all ancient times. We're modern now.
Yeah.
And so these farmers started using it, and it became a revolution for them. And it was actually called the Green Revolution of the 1960s. And so the Green Revolution was actually use of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or NPK fertilizers. And the NPK fertilizer did turn plants green because nitrogen and phosphorus do that. But what was lacking in those plants for the first time in human history was the nutrients and the medicine that should always have been in that food. And so the plants became weak. Just like a human being who lacks nutrients, their immune system goes down. And when a plant's immune system goes down, it becomes prone to viruses, pests, and it can't excrete the stuff from the root system that would keep weeds at bay. And so now the plants are getting attacked from the outside, if you will, and the chemical industry says, no problem, here's a new chemical weed killer, here's a pesticide. And so the farmers got themselves locked into this codependent relationship with chemical fertilizers and chemical drugs for the plants to keep them alive despite a failing biology underneath the surface there.
Right, akin to taking a drug to deal with the symptoms of some ailment that you have that creates a whole battery of side effects that then require you to take another drug to deal with those. It's just an environmental version of that.
It's exactly the same thing. In fact, the drugs have been the same in a lot of ways. The main drug is antibiotics. Western medicine really got its first foothold with penicillin, the first antibiotic, and that happened to be in the 1940s with World War II. And so we developed in the same decade the antibiotics that would kill the bacteria in our body with the antibiotics that would kill the soil. And I say antibiotic because these chemicals that we were using as pesticides are largely antibiotic rather than what you would think of maybe a weed killer or something. And the most famous of these, of course, has become Roundup, the most single successful chemical warfare that's ever been sold on the planet. We currently sell and use 4.5 billion pounds of glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the chemical, to treat the soils of the earth. 4.5 billion pounds of single chemical annually. That chemical was never patented as a weed killer. It's only been patented as an antibiotic, and then it was repatented as an antiparasite.
That was the original purpose of it, correct?
Well, it's the mechanism. It's the mechanism they recognized. And so the mechanism of glyphosate is to go in and block enzymes in soil bacteria, fungi, and plants. And that enzyme pathway is called the shikimate pathway, and it's important because it makes a number of the essential amino acids. Our bodies are composed of over 200,000 proteins, but we only have 20,000 genes. We have this pathetically dumb genome in the sense that a flea has 30,000 genes. So you're 2/3 as complicated as a flea at the gene level, which I find reassuring. If I can't find my keys or I'm having a bad day, I'm like, hey, I'm 2/3 as complicated as a flea. What are my real expectations here? But the reality is we're very simple at the genetic level, and yet we make over 200,000 proteins from a bunch of amino acids. There's 26 amino acids that will build those 200,000 proteins. Those 26 amino acids are just like the 26 letters of the English alphabet in the sense that the vast majority of those are useful, but not critical. But the vowels, these 8 vowels in our language, if you subtract one of those vowels, you can affect hundreds of thousands of words. The vowels in the amino acid vocabulary here are the essential amino acids, which if you start to tweak any of those 9, you're going to start to lose tens of thousands of protein structures in their functionality and in their unique form. And so those essential amino acids, not only are they important like the vowels, they also can't be made by the human body. So those 9 have to come from your food chain somewhere. And it turns out that they are only made by the bacteria, the fungi, and the plants. You don't have a shikimate pathway in your human cells. And so these essential amino acids are blocked through the shikimate pathway by Roundup. And so imagine treating a food chain with a chemical that blocks the ability of these plants to make the building blocks for a healthy human body. Forget about a human, it's a dog, a cat, any mammal, any complex multicellular biology is going to depend on these essential amino acids. And we literally, in the last 15 years, subtracted out the ability to build the body because we changed the 26 letters. And so the current statistics is that less than 1/10 of 1% of the Roundup used on the planet actually hits a weed. The other 99.99% gets into the soil and in the water system and washes off. And so we are now seeing the runoff from these farms and in the water table itself. So we have fossil aquifers of the United States here that run from Canada all the way down to historically Mexico that is now dried up. We've turned over 1,000 square miles of Texas into desert over just the last 20 years from sucking water out of the ground. That fossil aquifer is now contaminated with Roundup that's filtered down into this ancient freshwater source for us. And then in the same moment, you've got the Mississippi River, which collects over 80% of all of the Roundup in the country. And then it's evaporating the whole time. So it's going into the air that you breathe, and then it goes into the clouds, and then it rains down on us. Recent studies in the air and rainfall in the southern United States is showing 75% of the rain, 75% of the air contaminated with Roundup. So before you even take a bite of food, you're being hit with an antibiotic when you breathe. You're getting hit with an antibiotic when you experience rainfall. And so you may be growing organic crops, but they're getting rained on. And so we have now locked this water-soluble toxin into our environment. Fortunately, to give you a little bit of breather here from the bad news is that there are bacteria and fungi that can eventually digest the glyphosate. The downside is we need to stop spraying it so that they can return. We're decimating those very bacteria and fungi by the presence of Roundup to the point where they're not digesting it. Current estimates is if we stop spraying Roundup tomorrow, it would take about 50 years before our ecosystem saw a drop in the level of Roundup below our toxic level. If the conspiracy theorist was right, then we'd see 1 in 2 people with cancer, we'd see 1 in 30 kids with autism, we'd see Parkinson's going crazy. They're literally repeating back if it was toxic, we would see literally what we're seeing. And so the reality is the public health statistics have gotten so grim in the last 8 years that nobody can call this a conspiracy theory anymore.
But it's almost like, but where's the direct, where's the smoking?
The smoking gun is what's been missing. That's what we found in 2012. So in 2012, we found it backwards. I don't think anybody's actually smart enough with the human gray matter that we're given to actually create a paradigm shift prospectively, right? So every great, mind that we look to in the past, Galileo or, Ben Franklin or anybody, we said, they discovered something, or, Edison.
No.
These just came at moments when the evidence got so overwhelming that it became obvious, right? And so in the same way, in 2012, the evidence was getting so overwhelming that we were onto something in the nutrition world. But at the time, I was still thinking cancer therapy, because my background was in chemotherapy development. And so when I found these molecules in soil that looked similar to the chemotherapy I'd been making, a lot of bells started ringing. Like, what is that? Where did it come from? How is there medicine in the dirt? Like, where is that coming from? And within a few weeks of that discovery of those molecules, we found out that bacteria and fungi were making these specific shapes of these carbon molecules. And that really closed the loop for me, because there had been some papers coming out in the mid-2000s in the cancer world that were starting to say that the bacteria in your gut were predicting which cancers you would get. If you're missing these bacteria, you would get prostate cancer. If you had these bacteria, you would get breast cancer. That was so radically bizarre and out there for our current model, even to this day, as to how cancer worked. But now you fast forward 8, 10 years, and now there's tens of thousands of articles that are showing that genomically, the bacterial genome is way more important in determining cancer than the human genome. And so this reality was hitting. And so in 2012, when we discovered these chemicals that look a little like chemotherapy that are made by bacteria and fungi in the soil, it suddenly closed the loop of, oh my gosh, what if the bacteria in our gut is doing the same thing? What if the bacteria and the fungi are actually our best source of medicine for everything? And so that's the direction we were going. But as soon as we put this into petri dishes with cancer cells and beyond, we suddenly realized, no, there's something way deeper happening with this information stream coming out of bacteria and fungi. And it was my chief science officer, Dr. John Gildea, a PhD in genetics and cell biology, and he was the first to realize that we had put our finger on the glyphosate toxicity issue, is that this communication network from the bacteria and fungi was actually supporting the protein structure in our gut lining. And so it turns out that the gut is held together, so these trillions of cells that make up that cellophane layer, by tight junctions. These are Velcro-like proteins that hold one microscopic cell to the next to create this coherent carpet. And he had recognized before this, in a number of other labs that started to publish, that glyphosate seemed to increase the permeability of this membrane. And nobody was really sure why yet. But we suddenly realized that if this bacterial communication network was in there, we couldn't injure the membrane. It became bulletproof to the glyphosate injury. And so in that journey, we started to really study glyphosate and its relationship to the human cells, because like you said, Monsanto's been swearing up and down that there is no harm to the human body because the shikimate pathway only exists in bacteria and fungi. Well, that may be true regarding that enzyme target, but the classic thing with any drug is it always has off-target effects, right? And so that's why drugs have side effects, is they don't actually go and do exactly what your doctor says it's going to go do. It's going to hit a bunch of the receptors and do other things. The side effects of glyphosate that are outside of the shikimate pathway is direct injury to the protein structure that holds your gut lining together. This would be bad news if that was it, but it turns out that every macromembrane in your body, the blood vessels that fuel your entire body with oxygen and nutrients, are held together with the same tight junctions. The blood-brain barrier that protects your peripheral nervous system and your brain, same tight junctions. The kidney tubules that are held together to detox your body, same tight junctions. And so what's happened as we've introduced a chemical that's directly toxic to this Velcro-like protein is we turn into leaky sieves on the front end, gut leak and nasal sinus leak. And so every time we breathe, every time we eat, we're starting to leak and our immune system gets overwhelmed. And then the blood vessels that are supposed to deliver either an immune response from peripheral or get nutrients to some distant space is also leaking. And so we're getting permeability of the blood vessels. Then you get to the blood-brain barrier. This is supposed to be the holy of holies. A peripheral nerve or the brain is supposed to be protected against everything in your blood, because even glucose, which is the main fuel for your brain, should not get into the brain in an unregulated fashion. It will damage the nerves. And so the holy of holies of the central and peripheral nervous system is being destroyed. And so if that's true, if glyphosate was really damaging that, then we should see a massive explosion in neurologic injury to children and adults starting in about 1996. That's exactly when we see this steep increase happening in autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodegenerative conditions like MS, autoimmune diseases, and all the rest. I mean, all of this has sounded like a lot of bad news, but identifying a problem is so much of the solution. And so now that we identify the problem, look, we've put into our food chain a chemical that deletes the ability to build a healthy human body. We've put into the food chain a chemical that deletes the medicine out of our food, which we didn't have time to talk about, but that same shikimate pathway makes the alkaloids, which are the medicinal features of our food, is deleted by glyphosate. So we can build a disease body, we build a food chain that doesn't have the medicine in it, and then we take away the most vital thing, which is this microcosm, macrocosm phenomenon you just talked about. So far, I've been describing to you that we are losing the identity between the outside world and our immune system by the breakdown of these membranes. We get leak. That's literally taking away self-identity from the immune system, and so we get autoimmune disease where we're starting to react to our own body as if it was foreign. In the same way, at the macro level, I believe we're losing our self-identity as human beings as we start to leak. And we start to become majorly depressed, panic disorder. We start to get lost down these rabbit holes of doubt, insecurity, fear, guilt. We have spiritual crisis. We have relationship crisis that's on an epidemic level equal to cancer and beyond. The ability to stay in human relationships seems to be the most complicated thing that we could possibly endure right now. It's because we are literally losing self-identity at the cell level because we are eating a chemical that breaks our self-identity at the cell level. As sickness happens, and it results in an immune reaction in the healing process. I think that's what's happening to our society right now. We have a sickness and a disease on the planet of loss of self-identity and human consciousness of our purpose here, only to trigger the ultimate healing process, which is to realize that we're all one. We are all on one mission to find truth in ourselves and through one another. We are calling in community. We are going to overcome the isolation of our cell phone era. We're going to start to touch each other more. We're going to hug each other more because we have to. And that's a beautiful healing process that I already see afoot in the world around me. And I'm blessed to be able to go and speak all over the world right now. And I'm blessed in that journey to see humans changing their macro consciousness as they change their diet, as they change their nutrition, as they get in touch with their food chain, as they...
So this is on a channel called After School something. Let's see, what's it called? History, autism, chemical, after school. I think that's it. After school. And to have a good example of this that he was just talking about, this disease that we're experiencing, all we have to do is look at our
Wow, yes.
No. There's our girlfriend, John Berkelman.
So I don't know, see myself on tape for knocked out, and I used here for. Pure science, dear. I don't know.
This is John's channel. John
The
Birmingham.
world is full of make or break moments, especially if you have
Who shall I see? I don't know where John got that.
I like her. There's Danica and a baby.
Oh no, are you scared? Yeah, it's kind of thundering a little bit. Yeah, I'm sorry. Alright, we're just gonna go back in the house. It's too scary.
Yeah, a little autism there. A little glyphosate.
I don't know if it's. I don't know. Very shiesty, dude. I'm 58 years old, bodybuilder. Very shiesty, dude.
This is what John looks at all the time.
Hey, very shiesty. The Netherlands. Ready to steal your shit, poo shiesty,
He's
man.
showing you all the stuff he's been watching. So talk about You know, folks having issues. There it is. And he can't even have a conversation or talk or know or be or nothing.
These drugs. Oh, shiesty. Boy, getting him to say it. Say pretty shiesty. Oh, shiesty.
Let's see. Any comments? Let's see. This is what is for. Let's see. And Kate had me dying. No way you did this for 43 minutes. But you totally did. Quality content here. Guy walks into a bar and says, "Who's shiesty?" And of course, he took my response off this. I'm gonna leave another one. Hey, good morning, good evening. This is your Sensei Owl Bob coming to you from Dreamy Dreamland with Sensei Owl Bob. That's my YouTube channel. Come and watch it. I just put up a very interesting show about glyphosate. And I think John has been dosed with glyphosate. Right? And John is the perfect canary in the coal mine. You want to see what the human being is going to be in 2050? John Birmingham. They're all going to be John Birmingham, right? And all the children who are being born today will be just like Pooh Shiesty. Pooh Shiesty. It only wants to say, "Who should I stay?" Oh, well, that's okay too. So let's see how long it takes John to take this down, right? And one of the comments, he couldn't believe that this guy did it for 45 minutes, but John Birmingham did. Pooh Shiesty. There we go. So come on over to Dreamy Dreamland and watch the show that is live right now. Okay. So let's see what I can't even see. Guys, you got to put stuff in capitals. I can't. Even when my eyes fixed, I still can't see close up. So 2 people said hi there. So come on, let's have some more thumbs up. Let's have more subscribers, more hitting the bell. And come on, send me some cash to my PayPal. And, when they ask who it is, it's the Dude Awake 42 at Gmail. Dude Awake 42 at Gmail. Yes. A few of you guys in the last week sent a few dollars here and there, and I really appreciate it. That squeaked me by. I still don't, that's all I had. $67 from about a bunch of you is what is squeaking. What it allowed me to put a little gas in my car and enough to get here and to get back home. And enough to buy this. And I, depending on after I pay this bill, I may go to my next Wi-Fi spot and have a show. And I'll tell you a story about, here it is summertime. And my parents, if you've ever seen the movie The Great Santini, that was my dad, but he didn't fly airplanes. But he was a colonel in the Air Force, and he organized, the Air Force to obliterate Europe and to incinerate Japan, right? He has millions of people's lives on his soul. And he was, the guy who ran all the nuts and bolts of it, right? So everything, radios, keeping the airplanes in the sky, feeding everyone, building new wings one after another, right? And, facilitating that everyone, the chain of supply, right? And that was his thing. He was triple Burko, really good at it, right? And he was also in charge of security and intelligence. So when the guys would come back, especially the first aircraft that he brought online and brought into the circus of war was the B-24, the most mass-produced long-range bomber in World War II. Right? But it was a total. It was like designed by Ford, and it was just built to be mass-produced. They could kick out one B-24 every hour, and that sucker could fly 6,000 miles, so it could go, about 2,000 miles, 2,500 miles to the target, turn around and come back, and still have a little gas left to fool around with it, right? And it could carry a mammoth load of bombs, almost twice what the B-17. B-17, though, was virtually indestructible. This thing, if the ME-109 came straight at the B-24, there was no gun in the front until later on. So it would just go, and they'd have a cannon. You get 4 or 5 shells into the compartment where the pilot is, blow it up, the airplane falls out of the sky, right? The other thing was that the ME-109 came straight down, and there was no bolt turret on the top. The basically because they were doing everything they could to mass produce these things and kick them out at the beginning. So they had things on the side of the bomber, to shoot at airplanes that would come at it from the side, and there was one on the rear and one I don't think on the bottom either. So the Germans are smart guys, so they didn't attack the bomber, squadrons from the side, either straight down or straight on, with cannon. And if they got a few cannon shells right where the wings, because instead of the wings being an integral part of the airplane, why they could mass produce it, they could make the wings someplace else and just stick them on. And they weren't one big wing, wing here, and they just stuck on top of the 24. And it flew nicely, but the ME-109 came straight down, boom, 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 a couple of shots, it would blow the wings off and set the tanks on fire, and the airplane would go down. So more people died in the B-24 than any other aircraft because there were 10 guys in there, right? So they send out, 500 bombers to go bomb something, and each had 10 guys in, and only 12 would come back. They'd lose, 15 to 20,000 guys a shot. And my dad was the guy when he'd be up there with the point, okay, boys, you're gonna go to Schlitznachs, right? And so that's the kind of PTSD my dad had. He had nightmares of all those guys. I mean, and guys would survive this stuff because they were brave and they did amazing things. And if you ever, one time I watched the movie 12 O'Clock High, Gregory Peck, and that's it. That movie was the closest thing to reality of what the air war was. And there's this one scene where this guy who's like the bombardier, who was in the bottom of the airplane, the ME-109 got the shells into where the pilots were, and they were like, and those guys didn't die; they just got half the brain blown out, and they were like, oh, and the guy went up there and had to knock those crazy guys out of the way so he could fly the airplane. And he flew and then he went down and dropped the bombs, and he came back and flew all the way back, and he was covered in blood. And for 4 hours he had to deal, and no one came up to help him because the rest of the crew was, on the other side of the gas tanks. So stuff like that. And that's war. War is only to make money from Wall Street. Right? No one's watching this now. Oh yeah, one last shot before I jitter out of here.
Need any in there?
Oh no, that's good. Thank you, dear. So, so that's what it is. Pooh Shiesty. Oops. This. rings. He must have bought it online.
Please leave your message for 6.
Hey there, buddy. My phone is starting to kind of work. Talking to you on it. They must have done something magically in the airways because it's now working out in my neighborhood. Not in my deep green, but in about 4 miles from it. So anyway, and I can get a cup of coffee here. So I've been pretty much offline. I mean, I'm not offline too. I mean, I've had no money for gasoline, no money to pay my phone bill. So I've just been talking to the squirrels. The bunnies have moved in. I feel like Snow White. The bunnies are all around, and they're really great because my neighbor, who I do all these things for, and we're supposed to be trading, and he's supposed to mow my lawn because that's what his business is supposed to be instead of methamphetamines, And I really don't know because he's not, I never see him. He's always gone, and there's the usual suspects who always kind of come down my road and destroy it, and I have to, for me to get out, I have to keep the road going. But doing that exercise is actually really good for me, right? Because I can walk up this big hill, and he gave me this one tool that was the quintessential perfect road tool. I mean, it really was unbelievably designed. And then for some reason, he took it back so he could do weeding, but he hasn't done any. And so instead of the perfect tool, I have to use a rake. And the rake it only does 20% of what the perfect tool, because the perfect tool was a pick and a shovel and a rake all in one. And so I had to carry 3 tools with me, up this big hill, So anyway, but actually, the good side of that is that it's making me, I'm still losing weight. I'm down to 198, from 460 pounds to 198. I'm like, another 18 pounds and I will be the Adonis I was in high school when I was a lacrosse phenom and a swimming fish ace. And I was always good for third place, And in swimming, third is almost as good as first. So what else can I report? We've been having rain. All that rain that went to Kentucky, we're on the edge of it. So we got a lot of rain, but everyone was, like my neighbor, he, I don't know what deal he made with some guy, but he brought up, the guy brought up like 5 big dump trucks of dirt, but it wasn't dirt, it was clay. And so he dropped it down, and nothing, grows in clay. But the clay was dry, so it looked like good. It looked dark. But once it started raining, it turned into clay, and he had these reach them.
Press 3. For delivery options,
Press
press 4. To mark urgent, press 1. To mark confidential, press 2. To mark urgent and confidential, press 3. To mark message marked urgent and confidential. To replay your message has been sent.
Okay.
Thank you for calling.
Message has been sent. Thank you for calling. I'm excited. Anyway, so the story I was going to tell, not about my crazy rich neighborhoods. I should write that. I'm going to write a movie script called. I had the movie Crazy Rich Asians. I'm going to have crazy rich white people. And that no one in America is rich. Even people who think they are. No, they're just going deeper into debt. Meaning when I was, considered rich, I just had a mammoth, my credit score was like through the roof, like 90%. It's like way up there. Ahead of most people, right? Because I had money kind of in the bank, I had money invested in things. I was somewhat liquid. So when I would buy like a car or a house, I would not just pay cash for it. I would, get a loan and then pay it off in 2 years. And I did it through this bank, these 2 banks I had. where my renters were just putting, I wasn't collecting the money. They would just, part of the gigs, they would just deposit it directly into the bank, right? And they had to do it by a certain date, or else they had to pay a little bit more, and da 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 da. So I always had money in these two accounts, and I borrowed, and so I always had enough. I could have taken money out of that account and bought that car or bought that house, but I didn't. I get a mortgage, and they would pay, the mortgage would get paid out of those accounts, and I would pay an extra 2%, the mortgage plus a little more, right? And after 2 years, I had paid it all off, right? And then it showed so it showed unbelievably constant paying off of debt with a little bit extra and kicking off the whole debt in 2 years. So by the end of those 3 years, man, I had credit rating through the roof. And so, and I was making a good buck, so I just kept putting cash in those accounts and spending it like, no problem. So, and that's what people in America think are rich. Now, I had money to back it up. I was like the Federal Reserve. Well, the Federal Reserve doesn't even have money in the bank to back what their debt is. So, but they're not. They're going to do exactly what I did. They're going to walk away from the debt, right? So when I died, I had those 7 years, I couldn't work at all, and still had to pay certain things. And before I died, in 2006, when everyone was going crazy, just like they were in 2020, I got to have real estate, But people had money and had credit ratings in 2020, so they weren't like in the, from the dot-com bubble of 99 to 2006, banks would give anybody money, right? And so, and most of them weren't like me, paying it off, right? And I was paying it off regularly and quickly, right? So, when 2006, I was working for the corporate world, so I saw the 2008 rolling up. I saw it, when the bond market and the credit thing go against where normally they do this, and they were doing this. When the price of oil just kept precipitously dropping, even though it was being used. When there were tons of wars everywhere being fought on credit cards. So anyway, that was the thing that happened after World War I in the Roaring '20s, and then we had the Great Depression. Right? And then we didn't get out of the Great Depression until World War II came along, which was like the shot of meth into our body politic. And America at World War II, the rest of the world was bombed into the Stone Age. We were the only guys who never got bombed, had this mammoth machine to manufacture stuff. That's what won war, and tremendous, colossal production of oil. And after World War II, we stopped using oil. At the end of World War II, the American people were recycling 90% of everything, right? All the cans and paper and cardboard and you name it was recycled. And the manufacturers were not packaging stuff and they would sending big bales of things, and into the supermarket you kind of took how many pounds you wanted, right? Kind of what the co-op is today. But they don't even do that today. They still manufacture just packaging. Because the oil guys need to use that oil, plastic, right? And our pharmaceuticals, as I played that little video earlier in the show, virtually we have all these drugs to give to us for all these diseases, when really there's only one disease that's occurring to the human race, and that's inflammation. And I know this, my all the things I have is basically inflammation. I lost all that weight, and I cleaned up my diet. I exercised a good deal, and I took supplements, and I stayed away from toxic materials as best as I could, because it's in the air and the water. It's kind of hard to stay away from breathing air, but I have a really good water source. Until it, one of the reasons I'm going to stick out here, because there is no kind of water source like I do. I mean, I have one of those deep things, and I'm surrounded by mountains, so there's no, the closest use of glycomate is, 20 miles from me, right? So, and what's really interesting is there's one place near the highway. It's about 8 miles from me, and the whole side of the mountain is covered in kudzu. And I think it's pretty. But people, the county comes and sprays it, right? Well, they spray it, everything dies, and within 2 weeks, it's all grown back. And then they don't do it for until next year, and then they spray it. And what it's doing is making the permaculture and the interconnectivity of the forest and every nature up there that basically mushrooms. The term is escaping me, but it's this. Every tree, every plant, everything is interconnected to this mushroom motif that is like the internet of the forest, right? And so it enables this tree or that tree or this plant to give the heads up, hey, something's going on, and so the rest of the forest strengthens itself to put up with that. So, anyway, so I live amongst that until they really, since 2019, the rich have come in here and just decimated the tops of the mountains and et cetera, et cetera. But then they didn't build anything. So they haven't started spraying. Those tops are just rock, dirt and rock, ready for somebody to build their $1 million house on. And so the question is, what's going to happen? So I'm going to stay here until my water source gets, and I can tell just by how the plants are growing, how the water source is. Once I see the residue, the residue, it's raining and it's in the air, and so the glycomate is but it's not flowing. I'm at the top of this mountain range, not tippy top, not on top of the mountains, but I'm the first holler. So I'm in a drainage place where whatever ick is, it's gone right away. So it doesn't stick around. And my water source is right into artesian well that goes way, way down. So, and every 4 or 5 years, I take it sampled. There's a guy in Johnson City, take it to him, and he's been taking my water samples since 2003. Right? And so, as long as, when I first gave it to him, he said, wow, man, this is the cleanest water I've ever seen. And it's got all these minerals and all this stuff that's really good for you. And, you should bottle this. So anyway, but like I said, the rich people have come in and bought up everything. They haven't built anything yet. They haven't really gone nuts yet. But once they do, I have a neighbor but he's left. He got bored, Now he has, meth people staying in his house. And he's got another piece of property about 12 miles away up in meth land. And so but he's left that too. I have no idea where he is. And he's got kids. I don't know where he put his kids. And it's a very strange world, but I have no idea. But it's quiet. So they're very quiet. They make no noise. So the meth people do. And I have no idea whether they're meth people. I'm just the way they look. When anyone's skin looks green, I live out in the woods. Their moss should be growing on me, but not really. I haven't taken a shower in 2 years. I haven't taken a bath in 4 years. I just hose myself down because when the model first came out as caveman, we didn't have showers and baths. We weren't shaving. We weren't, none of the above. So, that's me, right? And I wear the same clothes all the time, as long as they don't smell or aren't rotting off my body, And how I wash them, I put them out on the clothesline. So we've been having a lot of rain, so I just put all the dirty clothes out on the clothesline. I spray it with this kind of cleaning stuff that I created, and it's very, it's got a lot of It has a lot of hyssop and stinging nettles and lard and 120 proof alcohol. I have a buddy of mine who make sanitizer for the state. You know, back when 19 first came out, they had no hand sanitizer. They went to them and said, listen, just turn your still into hand sanitizer. We'll pay you more than what you're getting for the lightning. So we did. So it's 200 proof. It's like, 200% rather than 70% or 100%. It's 200%. I mean, these things. So all of those things I put in there. So I got them these. So this is my hand sanitizer. Right? And that's made from all of those things I just mentioned. And this is kind of what I do. Up near my nose, where I put it on these hairs. Whatever I'm breathing in, it kind of goes through that. The vapors kind of kill whatever. And in the little stinginess, you know it's working. Just don't get in your eyes. So I've been very, very, very intricate. My eyes aren't really good. I'm always wearing these. I found a place with $1 for these. These are the best. So put them on, and they protect my eyes 100%. And they bring the glare and the brightness way, way down. But I can't read that. But since you're not printing anything anyway, I won't have to read it. But the story I'm going to tell today is the story of summer, my experience of summer. And I was telling you about my dad, who was pretty PTSD. Plus, he was Italian, had that Italian stallion temper. And he was always, Mr. Macho. I mean, he was in shape till the day he died. So, I mean, he had things wrong with him, like his blood. And he couldn't control his bladder or his colon. So all of the big box stores had photos of him with a line through it, because he had these really baggy shorts. And when he felt, a movement coming, he would just stop. He would kind of squat a little bit. He'd pull his leg of his shorts to the side, and chocolate milk would come out of his butt, right? And he would leave a river of chocolate milk, right? He had these little wipes in his pocket, and he'd wipe his butt, through the pants, like it was really baggy shorts. He didn't wear any underpants. And he would walk on, happy as a clam, leaving, the Mississippi in Walmarts, right? And so after he kept doing it, they just put in every Walmart within 50 miles of his house, every Kmart's, every, Piggly Wiggly, every store that he would go in and do this. And he had, because he bombed, whole species of people into oblivion. So a little bit of mud on the floor. And he could have gone out the parking lot, gone over one of the drains, or gone into the bathroom that they actually have, but not like that. And that was his motif. That was his attitude. Him first, right? And he kind of, but his best thing about him was what he imparted on me is the love of vacation. Every summer we would take a vacation. Every winter we'd take a vacation. He had a house down in Florida that we, in Pompano Beach, that we went to every Christmas. We had Christmas in Pompano Beach. It was a killer, because you'd be in shorts and go swimming, and Santa Claus would be there in a Hawaiian shirt, and they put the Christmas lights on the palm trees. It was in the 1950s, early 60s. It was like, that was a sweet time to be in Florida, right? And in the summertime, he would do these things where, no one would want to be in New York City or even, Nassau County. And so he would rent these houses, like in Shelter Island, Long Island. Long Island looks like a fish. And in the tail, there's a little island called Shelter Island. And in the 50s and 60s and 70s, that was a dead place, right? And so, because it was still, you got along, the Long Island Railroad went right to where the ferry was to Shelter Island. And he also went to Oldfield, which is where Stony Brook College is, New York State, Stony Brook. That's Suffolk County, Oyster Bay, New York, Stony. So he'd rent these houses, and these were houses that the rich people had in the 20s, right? Glenda and what's his name would be at these places, straight out of what's his name story about the guy who got rich and pretended who he was. I forget, Glenda and what's his name wrote the book, and anyway. So, how many people are watching? Oh, maybe 3, 2, 1. How many? Maybe 0. We can't see. So we'd have these great places. So Oakville was this great estate, and we were like in this house, but it was one, and had a gigantic lawn, and we played croquet and badminton. My dad bought a hi-fi, and he bought these stacks of 77s, and we'd listen to classical music, and like the Kingston Trio, and what was to become folk music, right? And so it was quite interesting. And jazz. He had jazz, classical, and what would become folk music. And no radio, no TV. And his house had a big library. I read all the books, And my parents, always thought, oh, well, he's, this is when I was still young, before the nun murdered me. And before I went off to be with the Marinols, and they checked me out in every which way you could imagine, and said, oh, no. Because in those days, nobody had autism or ADD or dyslexia or any of that stuff. You were either stupid or normal. Because I was in my own private Idaho, because I was brought up by my grandma, I wasn't textually identified as anything other than Woozy Owl, little devil. So, but in all those years that grandma took care of me, summer I would go with my parents. We'd go on these, we went up to where my mom came from, St. Johnsville, which is up near Watertown, near the Erie Canal, and where her great-great-great-grandparents were some of the, what do they call those people? They were like land pirates. They just stole everything from the Indians. But became rich, right? So summers were quite interesting. And then the first time we went up there, and I met my great aunt, who was the last rich one of my mom's family. And that's why my mom is the way she is, because this woman, if you ever saw the movie It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, and they had Mr. Potter, my aunt was Mr. Potter to the 10th power. My aunt made Mr. Potter look like Goldilocks. It's like, so anyway, that was so every summer was like something, and I'm writing novels about these adventures, and I'm going to tell you their stories. So I'm moving on to my next. I have to go run some errands, and then I'm going to pop in to Thailand. I'm going to fly over to Thailand. I'll be in Thailand, and I will tell you the story of summer vacations. Right? So I'm going to put my reading glasses on and see if I can even read how many people are there. Nobody's there. Okay. So this is a good time to go, and nobody's giving me a thumbs up. So come on. I know most of you guys watch this later. So give me some thumbs up. Send me some money to my PayPal, the Dude Awake 42 at Gmail. And come on, some of you write me or drop me your, just say, hey, Al, here I am, and I'll drop you some novels, right? Okay. So I'm out of here. It's been 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 18 seconds. Love you guys. Talk to you in a little bit.